Because, of course, yes, you have pre-press to an extent.
To an extent, yeah.
Okay. Then when you talk about rule of law, I don't know. Rule of law
to an extent,
also an extent.
To an extent, yeah.
To an extent, right?
Yeah.
And then you talk about independence of the judiciary. I don't know whether you are shifting or you are sitting properly. Okay. You're talking about the independence of the judiciary. Whether in the judiciary in Nigeria is actually independent.
Okay.
It's something that even for a toddler, it is clear that in Nigeria's judiciary is not independent.
Why did you say so?
Of course, it is not about being an arm of government. All right. Of course, that does not make you an independent. Of course, when you as an arm of government, you do your things without a cause, okay, and then you only interact as much as the constitution allows you, or the extant laws allow you to do so. Okay, I've always said to my students that when you talk about collaboration amongst the three arms of government, when you talk about a harmonious relationship, there's nothing wrong with being harmonious, right? Or establishing a harmonious relationship among the three arms of government. But Chinachebe says when a handshake is above the shoulder, then it's something else you are talking about. And so, yes, the three arms of government should be able to relate, should be able to, harmonize, and, in the areas where you are granted. And for you to even have anything, of course, you must go cap in hand begging the executive arm of government. And then you find that, and of course, the ordinary judiciary should operate on its own in terms of his housing policies, whatever things, welfare services, in terms of vehicles he uses, and they should be able to. An independent judiciary should have policies, should have their own things to run on their own without recourse to the executive arm of government. But when the executive arm of government, behaves like, there is a largesse that you are given to the judicial arm of government. So what makes them independent?
All right. So let's get back to, you've
those are not probably happening in Nigeria because they have been compliant into the whims and caprices of political leadership. Of course, what do you have? And so when even those countries where these things are happening, and you can see the level of the level of responses, positive by the people, because they have been denied over time of governance.
All right.
And so in Nigeria, for instance, we have not had it, all good in the type of liberal democracy that we are practicing. It is not as if, the features of liberal democracy, are not good for us per se. But we have, as a people, decided to jettison what is good and have chosen the path of dishonor.
All right, we'll go for a quick commercial break. And now that you've mentioned the people in these countries that have military rule celebrating, I want to ask now, I want us to go back to history and look at when we had military rule in our country. Was it a way forward? We would go into all of that when we come back from the commercial break. place, 92.3 Nigeria Info. I am Kala Dakoribatibo. We haven't had facts on right now. And my guest, Professor Kenneth Nweke. And we are looking at the military coup in Africa and, about 6-7 countries thereabouts. The recent one being Gabon in the Central African region. And we're wondering, democracy in Africa, we're looking at how it is fed over the years, right? In Nigeria, for instance, we've had a series of military interventions. We've had several of them, but the military decided to hand over to democratic governance in 1999, and ever since then we have been able to transition from one civilian government, or should I say democratic government, to another. However, when we look at the rest of our neighbors, like the Republic of Niger, it calls for concern, and that's why we're having this conversation with the Prof in the studio. And before we went on break, Prof mentioned that the people in some of these countries where the military has taken over, that there were jubilations and the people did rejoice. But I do have my concern. Jubilation, yes, maybe because of the kind of leaders that they have. For instance, in Gabon, they've got good natural resources that are not being unearthed. In Republic of Niger, for instance, uranium is a very sought after energy resource that is not properly utilized for Niger Republic. And so these are some of the issues. Africa is so blessed, leaders not utilizing what they're blessed with, and that's where we find ourselves in. And by the way, of important note is that it's the francophone countries that are even going the way of the military. So what is wrong with the democratic governance in those countries? But is the military the way forward? That's the question I want to ask you now, Prof.
It may not be the way forward, but when a system is fraught with a lot of issues of governance, system not being able to deliver on the social contract, and so the fallout, anything can be a fallout, and so fallout may be the military intervention. Of course, if not for the military, who again can seize power? Because it's the barrel of the gun. Of course, the power, the barrel of the gun is something that the gun is what has given them the opportunity to do what they did or what they are doing.
Are you saying the people cannot hold the system of government?
How would they do so with empty hand and all that? And so, because of course they could have done so when institutions work, but in Africa, the institutions are not working. How strong are our institutions of democracy? The judiciary that ought to be, the legislator, of course, that one from the people, they are coming out, and so so what is the pedigree? What are their pedigrees of those who, go to the National Assembly? The legislature in those African countries, including Nigeria, that we have here, from the local government level to the state to the national level. And then probably you at the national level, you begin to see at the Senate you have, past governor, past this, and then dragging their. It is not a place to drag your clothes up and down. It's not a place to display affluence. Some of them, have too rich, and sometimes you begin to also question, how they got into these riches.
Now, let's look at the style of governance. Now you've mentioned the affluence and all of it. Could it be that usually the power of governance is given to the center in these African countries, or almost all African countries, and so the president seems to be, too powerful for the institutions to handle, or even a governor of the state? What if we decentralize governance in Africa and say, okay, the local government, becomes the strongest
Who
government?
decentralizes it?
I mean, we could all have that conversation, couldn't we? I
Wh-
mean,
which
it's simple government
Who?
that
How?
you guys taught us in school.
Yes, so who does the decentralization? And of course, when you send people who ought to represent you, represent your interests,
Yeah.
represent the interests of the constituents, they ought to go back to their constituents, get feedback from their constituents. So how many times do they go back to their constituents or constituencies to have, constituency meetings? And then in those meetings, they get feedback. How do you assess us in the last 1 year? And what would you want us to do?
Now, Prof, they don't come to us, but we also don't go to them to demand that they come to us. I'll give you.
I agree with you now.
Because now, for instance, you and I were talking of air. The family of Ali Bongo have been in power for 53 years, thereabout. I was reading online that Paul Biya, the president of Cameroon, has been there since 1982. Before a lot of the people who were listening were born. 1982. That 40-something years now. There is
he should be buried in that government house. As soon as he drops, he should be buried there, and then his spirit will continue to rule Cameroon. Go ahead.
So there are other African countries that I can call. I'm trying to remember. So he's also I think almost 90 years now. I'm talking about.
Yes,
Paul
it
Biya.
is.
Almost 90 years
Yes.
now. So when you look at it, it looks like the power is concentrated in the center, and so everybody wants to become president. Everybody wants to get there. Should we, once again, or would it even work? Because it looks like Africa's own is define all the system of governance working in other parts. So the question, should we decentralize? Will it work?
You see, I've said to you, if we must decentralize, of course, the onus to do so lies with political leadership, right? And then
Who are answerable to the people?
who ought to answer to the people? You're laughing. Who ought to answer to the people?
Okay.
And of course, when you have political leadership that has over time decided to usurp political powers to its own advantage against the will of the people, of course, what they do in terms of policies, programs, is to strengthen, their overbearing influences on every matter, whether in terms of policy formulation or policy implementation or even lawmaking. What they send to the legislature is what can help them to either make more money and then increase, their powers over the people. And so over time, the way the executive arm of government, and that's why typically you see in the United States of America, where even former presidents are being dragged to court. So how many former presidents in Nigeria have been dragged to court?
I do think there's an unwritten agreement.
Unwritten what?
Agreement.
Agreement that what? You do for me?
I do.
Inyendeba, abi?
I don't know about that.
So you see, so there is, I mean, in a sane country, in a country where institutions are working, and that's where Trump can be dragged to come and answer for what he did while in office.
Let's go back to history now. The several military coups that happened in the country. You probably experienced some of them. Did they do better? Were they economically viable? Because it's one thing to say, oh,
I saw I heard the one, from 1983 down. Yes, but the other ones, I wasn't, I was small. Yeah, maybe probably not born. Yes, then go ahead.
So from the ones you experienced, yes, they could have been able to say, okay, this government, for instance, the Shagari government was not doing great, so let's remove the Shagari government. But did they really prefer the solution to because it looks like it's still the same problem we've been fighting ever since then up until now. There is no steady power supply. There is no D's. A lot of the issues, we're not nursing our natural resources in Africa, despite having one of the largest population, in terms of continents. Africa has got about 1 billion plus, thereabout, 54 countries, and yet we're not utilizing the natural resources and the human resources that we have. So did the military in the past really do anything, to help the situation?
Yeah, the military did their part, but you can't compare the level of freedom that we have today, even in this studio in the first place.
Okay.
That we can talk what we want to talk, and to an extent, you know. But that could not have happened during the military era.
Okay.
And even when it happened, a lot of people suffered for that, you know, or for such actions.
All right.
Okay. So the military did not do so fantastic, you know, while they took over power. You know, I mean, what has ever, you know, guided their actions, inactions? It's about personal aggrandizement and nothing more. You know, this culture of stealing. Okay, the only difference today, if you want me to analyze that, the difference between the stealing during the military time and the stealing today is that you have maybe over 1 million Nigerians who are in democratic structures, you know, doing the stealing in a democratic manner, you know, that seems very democratic.
Okay.
Then during the military, the stealing was for very few. Are you know what I'm saying?
Governor General
and all that, and then whoever that they wanted to empower, they empowered.
Okay.
And so if you compare at the time, and so we are one man, we're still talking about Abacha's loot, you know, that runs into billions of dollars up to today. That means that he may have stolen for over 200 persons would have stolen. Maybe or maybe not. But this other one is that it is the stealing is cascaded to different, you know, levels of democratic structures. Okay, or using democratic structures to perpetuate, you know, the stealing.
Okay.
And all that. So that's the difference here. Okay, and then and again that in the democratic experiences that we have had, especially from 1999 when democracy returned. And of course, anything like military is for Nigerians, it's a no-no. I mean, no-no.
But
yes.
our neighbors are embracing it, and
Yeah,
you know, in the 60s.
The neighbors that are embracing it, you will see where somebody is ruling for 14 years. Has it happened in Nigeria?
It has.
So since 1999, at least you have somebody doing 8 years.
Yeah.
And then he's leaving.
Somebody
either after
6
doing
years.
6 years, he leaves.
Yeah.
And then 8 years, he leaves. Either goes to the National Assembly to go and wear Bavarica. I know what I'm saying. There, or he resigns after securing Senate seat, and then he goes to take a ministerial slot. You understand? In order to, you know, continuously perpetuate, you know, those. And so that's what you have had, you know, during this democratic era since 1999.
Okay, so the military not an option in Africa, and I do hope the countries who are now in military rule can have that roundtable conversation and understand. But then again, when we look across the country, because I did a research, about 166 countries, not all of them have got democratic systems of governance, like you mentioned. For instance, in Saudi Arabia and some of the Arabic countries, they've got a good economic system going for them, but they are not democratic nation. Some people have got their reservations about China, but China is also not a democratic nation. So do we have alternative? That's basically what I'm driving at.
Now you can understand.
I'm not putting in anything. I'm just
don't put. You're not putting anything. I will understand clearly, and that has been my argument. For instance, we have democracy in Nigeria, the so-called liberal democracy.
Okay.
And in some of the African countries, but the way it is as if this type of democracy is not what is working for us, for goodness sake. But it's been working perfectly well in other countries. Okay? I know outside Africa. But even in South Africa, it's working.
Is it?
To an extent.
Jacob Zuma has been in and out of...
better than what is happening in other African countries.
Okay.
Are you going to say?
Yeah.
Better.
Yeah, I agree.
Good. So the point I'm making here is that yes, you have United Arab Emirates, for instance, where our people go to, you know, like they are going for a break, lunchtime, and then they fly in and out. I have said, even last week, I said, what is the essence of government? Our people are not even asking for much. Just give us the basic necessities of life. Let me have a calendar. In the last 3 months, 6 months, I've had relative, 3 months. I've had relative electricity supply. Are you know what I'm saying?
Really?
Yes. And then, only that alone, if you are coming home, you want to go home early because you're not burning diesel, not burning fuel, right? You're happy going home. And then you are seeing the light, you smile, even without food. You smile because you know what it means in this fuel subsidy removal era, where you burn fuel for your vehicle and then you go home and burn fuel. So any day I'm driving home and I see light, I smile, Canada. And it means that Nigerians are looking for little things that will put smiles on their faces. Just give us small, even when you are taking the largest of all of them. If you give us small electricity for 14 hours, 18 hours, per 24 hours, we are good. In fact, give us good 10 to 12 hours, on 24-hour cycle. We are good. Then ensure that our roads are motorable. Ensure that, you can go to Nigeria Info, go to any part of, the state with your two eyes, or you can sleep with your two eyes closed, move around the city or hinterlands
without fear.
Without fear or favor. In Abuja, for instance, people move whether 1 a.m., 3 a.m., because there appears to be security. And one day I was moving and I saw policemen in one part of Abuja, and I was asking, what are they doing? Because there's nothing to even, secure. Not that Abuja is actually, completely secure, but to an extent, relatively.
I do understand where you're coming from.
You understand?
Yeah.
People still do nightlife, but how much nightlife, do you experience in parts of Niger Delta or in other parts of the country? And so life, what the people are looking for is, the basic necessities. Just let me live my life.
All right.
Oh, okay. So if any government, whether it's democratical or whether it's monarchical, like you have in those countries you are talking about, people are feeling the imports of governance.
As a political scientist, you've studied, the history of Nigeria's political sojourn, so to say. You have also studied the current political situation. What would you prescribe?
I won't prescribe, because if I prescribe, it will be it may be an aberration of an existing. Okay,
don't prescribe.
Good. So I won't prescribe. So all I can't prescribe in the studio.
Okay, you tell me.
I won't tell you. When you read, my researches, okay, that you can check in Google Scholars and all that, you can begin to see, some of the problems that, and they read them. Look at the recommendations.
You're talking like a politician.
No, I'm not. So you see, the problem is that yes, we have the that we have over time.
Yeah.
All I can say as a professor of political science, particularly policy and governance, we ought to have, this advocacy that we are doing today continuously until we are able to take our people to the path of being responsible to interrogate those who
are in government.
In fact, the first place to interrogate even the electoral processes that will produce those who ought to be in government. That's the starting point. But in Nigeria, okay, in Gabon, they are looking at the issues around the election, okay, that maybe somehow became flawed, that the military had to intervene.
They also talked about the economy.
Of course, they also talked about the economy. But in Nigeria, we are sitting on, okay, people sit, they cannot interrogate, the electoral processes. And now you are pushed to the judiciary to do. And then all you will hear one side democracy
in terms of party politics. Is it partisanship that has kept us in the passive?
Which party is that? But what are we participating?
So, for instance, if you call and talk about something, it's either they're divided into.
Of course, in their studio, it is known when I wake up in the morning. It's either the two sides. This one will be this one. At the time, I get fed up.
There are three now.
There are three now. They become three. Okay. So yeah, there are three. So no, but basically two. Basically, the other one maybe intervening. So you get worried. These are people. Yeah. All these ones are calling your studios and then they are lining either to left or right. After calling and supporting the candidates and all that or their so-called political leaders and all that, they are begging, looking for what to eat and all that. And yet they cannot channel or deploy those energies into asking these ones, to do this. Thank you.